When I entered the abandoned hospital to film content for my channel, the quarantine section door locked behind me. The bloody writings I saw on the walls filled me with horror. I spoke confidently to my camera as I walked through the debris-strewn lobby, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Hey guys, today we're checking out that hospital closed back in 1997 after what locals call the December incident. No one talks about what actually happened, but the place has been abandoned ever since. This hospital was the holy grail of urban exploration in this area. Most urban explorers avoided it, claiming equipment failures, strange noises, and unexplained feelings of dread. The main floor was standard abandoned hospital fare. Reception desks with rotting paperwork, waiting rooms with moldy chairs, a cafeteria with overturned tables. I documented it all, narrating the hospital's history as I'd researched it. The second and third floors held patient rooms, operating theaters, and storage areas. All had been picked clean by scavengers over the years. Still, I found enough interesting items to film. Old medical charts, antique equipment, and the obligatory creepy wheelchair in the middle of a hallway. Now I'm heading to the fourth floor, which housed the psychiatric ward. This is where things supposedly get weird according to other explorers, I told my viewers. The psychiatric ward was more intact than the lower floors. Patient rooms still had beds bolted to the floor. The nurses' station had patient records scattered around. I found a logbook and flipped through it, stopping at December 1997, the month before the hospital closed. The entries were increasingly frantic, describing patients with symptoms that didn't match their diagnosed conditions. The final entry simply read, "Moving all remaining patients to 5th floor quarantine. God help us." Looks like I need to check out the 5th floor quarantine ward, I told my viewers. Let's see what they were hiding up there. The stairwell to the 5th floor was chained shut with a faded biohazard sign warning against entry. I slipped under the chain, finding another set of double doors at the top. Unlike the rest of the hospital, these were heavy metal with small reinforced windows and serious-looking locks. They were slightly ajar. "That's weird," I muttered to myself. "These should be locked." I pushed one door open carefully and stepped into a wide hallway. Unlike the lower floors, this one was sealed off from the outside world. No broken windows, no graffiti, just decades of dust and silence. "5th floor quarantine ward," I narrated, keeping my voice low instinctively. "This is where they brought the patients during the December incident. From what I can tell, no one has been up here since the hospital closed." The quarantine ward was arranged in a large square with patient rooms along the outer walls and a nurse's station in the center. I explored slowly, documenting the strange setup. The patient rooms were more like cells with heavy doors viewing windows and no handles on the inside. I entered one of the rooms to show my viewers the interior. These rooms were designed to keep people in, not just to isolate them. Check out these restraint straps on the bed. Whatever they were treating here, they were serious about containment. As I turned to leave, I heard a sound that made my heart stop. The distinct metallic thunk of the quarantine ward's entrance doors closing. I rushed back to the hallway, calling out, "Hello? Somebody there?" Only silence answered. At the main doors, I found them shut completely, a small red light glowing above the electronic lock. I pushed against them, but they didn't budge. "Very funny," I called out, thinking another urban explorer might be playing a prank. No response. I examined the electronic lock. Somehow it still had power after all these years. A keypad suggested a code was needed to exit. "Great," I muttered. "Looks like we're temporarily locked in, guys. Don't worry, there must be maintenance access or fire escapes. I continued filming, playing it cool for the camera, while inside I felt the first flutters of panic. I'd told no one exactly where I was going today. If I couldn't find a way out, I could be stuck here for days before anyone thought to look for me. I decided to search for another exit, methodically checking each room. In one patient room, I found something disturbing. Words scrawled on the wall in what looked like dried blood. It spreads through the air. They're lying to us. Below it, another message. Dr. Kelly is not human anymore. And most chilling, no way out. They'll never let us leave. I swallowed hard, trying to maintain my on-camera persona. Looks like someone was having a rough time up here, probably just delusions from one of the patients. In the next room, I found more writing with similar messages, and the next, and the next. All the patient rooms had bloody writing with variations of the same warnings. My flashlight beam caught something on the floor of the central nurses' station. A trail of dark stains leading to a door marked "Observation." The stains looked like dried blood, decades old, but still visible on the linoleum. I followed the trail, documenting everything for the video. The observation room contained monitors and recording equipment, all dead now. A large viewing window looked into what appeared to be a surgical suite. The blood trail led to another door at the back of the observation room. This one was labeled Research, and unlike the main quarantine doors, it was unlocked. Inside, I found a nightmare. What had once been a laboratory was now a scene of carnage preserved by the sealed environment. Dried blood covered the walls, tables, and equipment. Papers were scattered everywhere, medical equipment smashed. "Jesus," I whispered, unable to maintain my upbeat narrator voice. "What the hell happened here?" I panned my camera across the room, stopping at a desk where a voice recorder sat. It looked relatively intact. On a whim, I pressed play, surprised when it actually activated, running on batteries that should have died decades ago. A man's voice crackled from the speaker, strained and frightened. "This is Dr. Thomas Kelly. Final report on case 138. The quarantine has failed. The pathogen has mutated again, becoming airborne. The symptoms now include, God help us, physical transformation of host tissue. Patients are experiencing rapid necrosis followed by seemingly impossible cellular regeneration. They are not dying, but they are not remaining human either." A crash sounded in the background of the recording, followed by screams. "They've broken through the isolation ward. I don't have much time. If you're hearing this, do not breathe the air. The spores can remain dormant for years. If the ward has been breached." The recording cut off abruptly. I stood frozen, my mind racing. Just a creative prank, I told myself. Some elaborate setup for another Urban Explorer channel. A loud bang from somewhere in the quarantine ward snapped me from my thoughts. Then another, like doors slamming open one after another. "Hello?" I called out, moving back into the main area. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then a shuffling sound coming from one of the patient rooms. The doors along the hallway, which I'd left open, were now closed, all except one at the far end. I approached slowly, camera still recording. If there's someone playing games, it's not funny anymore. From the open doorway came a sound that turned my blood cold. A wet, rasping breath, like someone drowning in fluid. I should have run. Everything in me screamed to get away, but I'd built my channel on going where others wouldn't, on getting the footage no one else had. I stepped to the doorway and aimed my flashlight inside. The figure standing in the corner didn't look human anymore. Its skin was gray and mottled with what looked like fungal growths erupting from open sores. Where its face should have been was a bloom of mushroom-like structures. It had no eyes that I could see, but when my light hit it, it turned toward me with a jerky, unnatural motion. I stumbled backward, dropping my camera, which kept recording as it clattered to the floor. The thing lurched forward, moving into the hallway. Behind it, other doors began to open, other figures emerging, shuffling with the same jerky movements. I ran for the main doors, slamming into them, desperately pounding the keypad with random numbers. Nothing worked. The shambling figures were closing in from both sides of the hallway. In my panic, I remembered the observation room with its sturdy door. I sprinted for it, slipping past one of the creatures which grasped at me with bloated gray fingers. Inside the observation room, I slammed the door shut, looking for something to barricade it with. I dragged a heavy desk across the floor, wedging it against the door just as something hit the other side with surprising force. Trapped in the observation room, I frantically searched for another exit. There had to be maintenance access, maintenance tunnel, something. In the corner, I found a hatch in the floor likely used for running cables between floors. As the pounding on the door grew more insistent, I pried open the hatch, finding a narrow utility shaft barely wide enough for a person. Without hesitation, I slipped inside, pulling the hatch closed above me. I descended in darkness using my phone's flashlight. The shaft ended at the 4th floor, where a similar hatch let me back into the hospital. I ran through the abandoned psychiatric ward, no longer concerned with filming, just desperate to escape. Behind me, I heard the hatch open, thumping sounds indicating my pursuers weren't confined to the 5th floor. I reached the stairwell and took the stairs 3 at a time, nearly falling several times. Finally, I burst through the lobby and out the main entrance into the blessed daylight. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. When I got home, I reviewed the footage, expecting to see nothing. Hallucinations brought on by fear and possibly harmful spores or chemicals in the air of that sealed ward. But the camera had captured everything. The blood messages, the lab, the recording, and worst of all, a clear shot of the thing in the patient room, its fungal-covered form lurching toward the camera in the seconds before I dropped it. When a rockslide blocked the path in an abandoned Nevada mine, my first concern was fresh air. As I moved through the darkness, I began to feel dizzy. I had only one way to escape: go even deeper. The rumors of rare earth minerals in the old mine were too tempting. If I could find even a small deposit, I'd have proof for my dissertation. The mine had been abandoned since the 1950s after a series of accidents drove the owners to bankruptcy. The locals in the nearby town avoided it, claiming the ground was extremely unstable. I'd been inside for barely 2 hours when I heard it, a low rumbling that quickly grew to a roar. The tunnel shook, dust and small rocks raining down. I ran toward the entrance, but didn't make it in time. With a deafening crash, the passage behind me collapsed, sending a concussive wave that knocked me to the ground. When the dust settled, I found myself in complete darkness, my headlamp smashed in the fall. Using my backup flashlight, I surveyed the damage. At least 30 feet of tunnel was now filled with rock and debris. There would be no going back that way. Stay calm, I told myself, taking inventory of my situation. I had my backpack with about 2 liters of water, some energy bars, a first aid kit, my geology tools, and extra batteries for my flashlight. My phone showed no signal as expected this deep underground. I also had my maps. The Blackwood mine was extensive with multiple levels and numerous branching tunnels. If the main entrance was blocked, there were at least 2 other exits according to the old survey maps. An air shaft that led to the surface about half a mile in, and a secondary tunnel that emerged on the other side of the mountain. I just needed to find them. The first priority was air. Old mines often had pockets of dangerous gases. Without proper ventilation, these could accumulate to lethal levels. I had a small emergency gas detector clipped to my belt. It showed elevated CO2 levels, but nothing immediately dangerous. Still, my dizziness suggested the air quality was deteriorating, especially near the cave-in where dust still lingered. I decided to move deeper into the mine, looking for the air shaft marked on my map. According to the survey, it should be about a quarter-mile ahead where the main tunnel intersected with a vertical shaft once used for ventilation. The tunnel stretched before me, timbers creaking with the settling earth. The mine was showing its age. Support beams sagged, water dripped from the ceiling in places, and rusted rail tracks ran along the floor where ore carts once traveled. I moved carefully, testing each step. The ground was slick with mud in some areas, dry as bone in others. My flashlight beam caught glimmers from the walls, quartz pyrite, and occasionally something that might have been the rare earth minerals I was looking for. Under different circumstances, I would have stopped to take samples. After about 15 minutes of walking, I reached a junction where the tunnel split in 3 directions. My map showed only 2 paths. Either the map was wrong or additional tunnels had been dug after the survey was completed. I checked my gas detector again. Gas levels were still rising, but there was something else now. Traces of methane. Not enough to be flammable, but concerning. I felt a faint breeze coming from the rightmost tunnel. Moving air was a good sign, potentially indicating a connection to the surface. I decided to follow it. The tunnel narrowed as I proceeded, the ceiling dropping so low I had to crouch in places. The air was noticeably cooler here, the breeze stronger. I pushed forward, ignoring the growing ache in my back from hunching over. The tunnel ended abruptly at a small chamber. Above me, I could see the source of the breeze, a vertical shaft extending upward, disappearing into darkness. This had to be the air shaft on my map. I shined my flashlight up, but couldn't see the top. Rusted metal rungs were embedded in the rock wall, creating a ladder to the surface. I tested the first rung with my weight. It held, but just barely. Decades of moisture had corroded the metal, making it dangerously weak. I had to try. The air in the main tunnels was getting worse, and this shaft was my best chance for escape. I began to climb, testing each rung before putting my full weight on it. The shaft was about 5 feet in diameter, straight up, with no landing points or rest areas. If I fell, there would be nothing to break my descent. 20 feet up, I encountered the first obstacle. Several of the rungs had broken away, leaving a gap of about 6 feet. I would have to stretch and jump to reach the next intact section. I secured my backpack, tightened my grip on the flashlight, which I'd clipped to my belt, and prepared to make the leap. There was no room for error. I pushed off with my legs stretching, my arms upward. My fingers brushed the rung above the gap, but couldn't get a solid grip. I began to fall. In desperation, I swung my body toward the wall of the shaft, jamming my boots against the rock face and pressing my back against the opposite side. Through sheer friction, I managed to stop my descent, wedged in a chimney climb position. Sweat poured down my face as I inched upward, using the pressure of my back and feet against the opposing walls. It was agonizingly slow progress, but I eventually reached the next intact rung and continued climbing. 50 feet up, I hit another problem. The shaft was blocked by a steel grate, likely installed as a safety measure when the mine was still operational. It was padlocked from above. My initial surge of despair gave way to determination. I still had my geology hammer. Bracing myself carefully, I began striking the rusted hinges of the grate. Each impact sent painful vibrations up my arm, but slowly the old metal began to give. After what felt like hours, I managed to bend one side of the grate enough to create an opening I could squeeze through. The surface had to be close now. I climbed another 30 feet before the shaft abruptly narrowed. Debris had fallen in from above, partially collapsing this section. I could see daylight, though, just a small patch of blue sky visible through the dirt and rocks. I dug frantically, using my hammer and bare hands to enlarge the opening. Soil and small rocks rained down on me, but I kept digging, focused entirely on that patch of ski. The hole widened enough for me to push my head and shoulders through. I emerged on a rocky hillside about half a mile from where I'd entered the mine. The fresh air was intoxicating after hours in the dusty tunnels. With a final effort, I pulled myself completely out, collapsing on the ground, gasping and laughing with relief. My celebration was short-lived. As I lay catching my breath, I felt the ground vibrate. A low rumble grew beneath me, and to my horror, the earth around the shaft entrance began to crumble. I scrambled away just as the opening collapsed completely, sending up a plume of dust. The entire hillside was unstable, likely undermined by the old tunnels below. I retreated to safer ground, taking stock of my situation. I was alive, but lost miles from the nearest road. With dusk approaching, my phone still showed no signal. I had survived the mine, but my ordeal wasn't over. I found my bearings using the position of the sun and began the long hike back to civilization, knowing that each step took me farther from the darkness below. The secret door I found in the basement during renovations wasn't shown in my house's construction plans. Inside the room was a single chair and rusty shackles mounted to the wall. The strange thing was that the rust stains on the shackles looked like they had formed recently. I never planned to renovate the basement. When I bought the 1920s craftsman house, intended to leave the unfinished space as storage. But 3 months after moving in, a heavy rainstorm flooded the basement with 2 inches of water. I had to clear everything out and tear up the old flooring. I took a hammer and chisel to the edge of the rectangle, expecting to find dirt underneath. Instead, I found a wooden panel. After prying it up, I discovered a trap door with an old iron ring pull. It wasn't on any of the house plans the real estate agent had provided. The previous owner, an elderly man named Harris, had moved to a retirement community after living in the house for 40 years. The listing had mentioned nothing about hidden rooms. I lifted the heavy door. Below was a set of narrow wooden stairs descending into darkness. I shined my flashlight down, but couldn't see the bottom. The air that rose from the opening was cool and dry, with a faint musty smell. Taking a deep breath, I started down the stairs, making sure to leave the trapdoor open behind me. The wooden steps creaked under my weight but felt solid. I counted 14 steps before reaching a small landing. Ahead was a door, heavy wood with a metal frame and what looked like a deadbolt. Surprisingly, the door wasn't locked. It swung open with a low groan, revealing a room about 12 feet square with walls of bare concrete. My flashlight beam illuminated the space, revealing its sparse contents. In the center was a wooden chair bolted to the floor. Against the far wall were a set of iron shackles mounted at about standing height. The room had no windows, no other doors, no visible ventilation. The walls were marked with dozens of vertical scratches, as if someone had been keeping track of time. In one corner was a metal bucket, and beside it, an old wool blanket folded neatly. But what sent a chill down my spine were the shackles. Though covered in rust, they showed signs of recent use. The rust around the cuffs was partially worn away, and there were darker stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood. I backed toward the door, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was. Nobody knew I was down here. If the door swung shut, I might not be found for days. As if responding to my thoughts, a gust of air swept through the room, and the heavy door began to close. I lunged forward, managing to wedge my flashlight in the gap just before it slammed shut. The door stopped, but my flashlight cracked under the pressure, its beam flickering. I pulled the door open again, heart pounding. There shouldn't have been any draft in a sealed underground room. I checked around the frame looking for a vent or air source, but found nothing. Taking a final look around, I noticed something I'd missed, a small notebook tucked between the wall and the chair. I grabbed it, then hurried back up the stairs, not stopping until I was back in the main basement with the trapdoor firmly closed beneath the broken concrete panel. That night, I examined the notebook. It contained entries spanning several years, all written in the same neat handwriting. The entries were short and clinical, documenting sessions with unnamed guests. The details were disturbing, records of how long people could endure confinement, how they responded to stimulus deprivation, and other psychological experiments. The final entry was dated just 3 months ago, around the time the previous owner, Harris, had moved out. It read, "Guest 12 expired unexpectedly. Cleansed room prepared for next. Must be more careful with selection." Instead, I decided to investigate Harris. A quick internet search revealed he had been a psychology professor specializing in human responses to isolation and confinement. His research had been controversial, but respected a pioneer in understanding solitary confinement effects. I needed to know more. Then, my blood ran cold. Harris had never made it to the retirement home. According to the property records, he had sold the house and left town, but where had he actually gone? I stared at the concrete panel covering the trapdoor. I needed to take another look at the hidden room, this time more carefully. Bringing better lights and my phone to document everything, I descended the stairs again. The room looked the same except for one detail. The blanket in the corner was now unfolded, stretched out on the floor as if someone had been lying on it. I was certain I'd seen it folded the day before. Had someone been down here while I was gone? The thought sent a wave of panic through me. I took photos of everything, then carefully examined the walls, looking for any clue about who had been kept down here. The scratch marks were tallies, I realized, hundreds of them grouped in sets of 5. Someone had been counting days. As I moved around the room, my phone, which I'd been using as a secondary light, suddenly lost signal. Not surprising underground, but then it began to vibrate continuously. The screen flickered, showing an incoming call from home, though I lived alone. I declined the call, and the phone returned to normal. Unnerved, I decided I'd seen enough. As I turned to leave, I noticed something on the chair I'd missed before. A small dark stain on the seat that hadn't been there during my first visit. I touched it, finding it still damp. Fresh blood. I ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. At the top, I heaved myself through the trap door and slammed it shut. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely slide the concrete panel back in place. That night, I locked every door and window in the house, but still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that the strange room had just triggered my imagination. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps overhead. I lived in a 1-story house. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but before I could dial, I received a text message from home. Going somewhere? Seconds later, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. I fled, taking only my car keys and phone. From a hotel room, I called the police, reporting a break-in. They found no signs of forced entry, but agreed to patrol the area more frequently. I couldn't bring myself to tell them about the room. Without proof, I'd sound delusional. Over the next few days, I researched Harris more deeply. His academic career had ended abruptly following ethics complaints about his research methods. Several graduate assistants had quit, citing concerns about his unsanctioned experiments. Most disturbing was a police report from 15 years ago when a student had gone missing. The investigation had led to Harris but was dropped for lack of evidence. The student was never found. I knew I needed to document everything before going to the police. I returned to the house during daylight, bringing a friend for safety. Together, we opened the trap door, planning to photograph and video everything, but the stairs no longer led to a hidden room. After only 5 steps, they ended at a concrete wall, as if the passage had been filled in while I was away. That night, back at the hotel, I received another text from home. "You shouldn't have left. Now I need a new place, a new guest." I never returned to the house. I listed it for sale as is and moved across the country. The house sold quickly. After a few days, my phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "Found a new home yet? I'm still looking for mine. Some secrets are meant to stay buried."